Well, welcome to episode 3 in season 3 of C.A.R.s, Coffee and Christ. This is our weekly podcast we have here at Automotive Royale, our company in Mounds, Oklahoma, right outside the Tulsa Metroplex area. And as always, I'm your host, Ross Turner, and I serve as the corporate chaplain here at C.A.R. Well, this season we have been planning 2 kind of concurrent side-by-side series within the season. And one, we started last week on our company values and talking about just different ethical practices and the purposes of those things. But we also began early in the season with the first episode about faith at work and talking about how to integrate Christian faith with our work, our jobs, our careers. And we talked first, I think last time, about being a Christian employee and the character that God requires us to have and the reasons behind that, the challenges, the opportunities that presents. So we want to build on that today. We want to talk a little further and maybe a little bit more theoretical and a little bit more theological, almost even, about calling, about work as a calling. It's more than just what we do. It's something we're designed, it seems like, to do. So with me today on this Friday morning, Joshua and Abigail King, our co-founders and our co-owners, are joining me. And I think this will be a great discussion for the 3 of us to have this morning. So thank you all for coming, and I was barely made it in today. My own car almost sabotaged me, but thank God for AAA. So we're here, and we're going to talk about calling today. So I thought maybe give a little bit of maybe a distinction here before we get going, because this might be further along than most people think about this. But you think about a job in relation to a career first, and then we'll kind of ask the question. But think about a job as just kind of something you do, you're employed to do, kind of a role, a particular role. But then you think about a career that's more of like a long-term job in a wider field and in maybe one particular industry. That's kind of how we differentiate those things, right? Typically, people want careers, not jobs. But we want to go maybe a little further than that today. We want to say, what's the difference between careers and calling? And I think there is something different to that. So let's start today maybe getting your thoughts about what might be the difference between a career, as important as that is, and really a calling. They can be the same thing, but maybe they're not too. So what do you all think? What might be the difference between career and calling, we think?
Careers and jobs often may be born out of just necessity and not necessarily a calling where it is something that you have an innate or God-given ability or gifting. Just thinking personally of my first job out of college that ended up turning into an almost 10-year career in the insurance field. It was born out of necessity. It wasn't that I had a passion for insurance. It wasn't that I had a gifting or a calling to talk to people about insurance and accidents and property damage. It was that I needed to pay the bills, and there was a job available for me, and it suited my needs. It didn't feed any desires that I had other than the practical needs, right? It didn't fulfill me in any way. It was I'm punching in and that's about it. Versus a calling where it is, this is something that you have that gifting where you could really excel and you could really make an impact on people's lives and on your own personal life as well. I think.
Love how you said that first part, how you were saying, hey, I did this for 10 years, but this was really more of a work that turned into some kind of career in insurance, but it really wasn't necessarily a calling of some kind.
Correct.
So there can be a difference there. Josh, were you sure?
Yeah, I think very similar. I was thinking, as Abigail was essentially like, hey, it's very utilitarian, a job. The way that the world is built around a system of money, you got to have it to be able to navigate your lives, protect your family, provide for your family. These are all it's a necessity the world has put on us. Let's just put it that way, And I think, and that is like a tool. I think a job is like a tool. Like I can go do this thing and use this thing to be able to provide for over here, and be able to do this and be able to do that. Money is a tool. So we're just kind of like gaining access to a tool that I can use in my life. Yeah. Right. And it's a very useful tool. Everyone needs it. It's actually a needed tool. I also think that we need to work. I think the human soul needs to work. And this is a big debate right now with things like universal income, other things like that. I don't want to get political, but I think that the idea is that I think the soul needs to work. Yeah. And I think that without purpose, people really suffer in their mind, will, and emotions. To not be too abstract with soul, but your mind, will, and emotions really suffer without something to do, something to contribute, something to be a part of. And I think even if it is something that isn't necessarily your calling, it's still good for you. I think working is good for your soul. And so there's kind of that piece, right? Like, so you're not just waffling in the dark, or wandering through life. You're contributing to, a community, right? In general, and, society. A calling, on the other hand, is something you're designed to do, right? It is innate skills, passions, desires the Lord to put in your heart. That's one way how people describe calling. I think that's how they're describing calling if they don't talk to the Lord. Yeah. But a better way, I think, is to actually talk to the Lord, who your Father, who thought and dreamt of you before the world began. Then He has made a purpose that He Himself would love to reveal to you. It's one of the special things the Father loves to do with His children, is reveal their calling. Moses, I will have you go and free. Yeah. His purpose in his life was to be raised as a king so he could free the slaves, which is exactly what Jesus did. Yeah. So it's a picture of Jesus, and his life was to portray a picture of Jesus into the promised land. But he had a calling directly from a burning bush. Sometimes the Father needs to give it to you directly. Yeah. Gideon, you mighty man of valor. Did he feel like that when he was sitting in a pit hiding? Yeah. No, he didn't. No, but there was a calling upon his life that was sent through an angel. But that word first originated from God. Mm-hmm. And again, it's David. I've anointed you king. Hey, you need to go to the house of Jesse and you need to tell him. So he sends his prophets to tell us those things. But I think that the best way is just to hear directly from him. Mm-hmm. It adds so much clarity to your life. It adds so much purpose. It's so much more meaningful. It's the most beautiful moments of my life when the Lord actually called me, to a thing. Yeah. So I think segmenting those is there's work tied up in the calling, but too many times I think people either never get to the point of asking, never know that that's even available, or never seek the wisdom of God to be able to get there, whether through the prophets, the church, the God Himself, or but specifically for you. And I just have found, this is more my experience, that the Father loves to tell people directly rather than through people. So if someone says, oh no, you don't need to go doing this, maybe go test that with the Lord, because really I found that that's such a personal thing that He cherishes that it's super important He does it, or He sends an angel to do it, historically in the Bible, So anyways, I just think separate the work you're intended to do from the work we have to do. Right. And, I think a lot of sadness falls when those are separate. But when they start to overlap, I think there's tremendous joy in being on calling and in work. Yeah.
It's kind of like the difference, what y'all are talking about is that, you can kind of find in a sense your utilitarian calling in a sense, through natural means and ways. It's kind of like, if you got tools in your tool bag and you started to use them properly, but you never know who made those tools. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's still helpful and it's still part of kind of how you're designed and whatnot to talk about a career, but a calling kind of reaches further into that. I think understands the design of that. I think understands why the tools are as such and why you are fitted to those tools, right? Yeah. And it does take more discovery. I think it takes more thoughtfulness. And certainly there's this spiritual element to it that we call it calling for a reason. It means someone else called you. It doesn't mean that you called yourself. That would be redundant and kind of weird. So it really is talking about someone else is calling you to something. Now, maybe you're not a spiritual person, and maybe it's just, your father told you to do this because that's the company business, and that's pretty common, at least in our generation, the one prior. Today, not as much so. but there's a sense of something spiritual there that I think is helpful to kind of consider. So before we get into those parts, though, I'd love to ask how you all came to maybe your own callings, and what they are, and kind of what happened. There's no kind of right answer here, but how did you come to your own conclusion about maybe what your calling or callings are? We'll talk about that, multiple callings in a second, but how did you arrive at those things, and what are they?
Well, I think for the longest time, I followed my passions. I started in that first category I mentioned, where I started in my passions and my skills. I have a passion for technology since I was a little boy, and my primary career is that, right? Yeah. And that has been exactly leveraging the gifts that God's put in me, my passion for technology, the things I could see in the material world, and then putting those to use into a career that allowed me to make use of the gifts God gave me, right? I think, but then, I had a moment where I finally, encountered God and a radical transformation from the world and the transition into the kingdom. And at that moment, I started just listening less to how the world said I should live my life, then more listening to how the Lord was saying I was living my life, and really just took his guidance and his cues from then on. So kind of like the pre was how I think most of the world does it, which is, hey, I've got these skills and talents, I have these passions, I'm going to put these to use. This is the place where I can make the most money doing that. The second side is an actual calling. So the first call was actually to myself, to fix myself, right? I just learned through life, we come through so many wounds, so many agreements, so many things that are wrong and not aligned to the kingdom of God, that he has to go through a correction process with us, which is sanctification in the church. But, that correction process took me 10 years. Yeah. So the first calling he had was for me, where he starts if you think of it as a tree, the inner ring, he starts with the small center part, and then we work outward. And then he had a call to family. I wasn't, at that time I wasn't married, and then it was a call to marriage, then it was a call to family. So again, another ring with marriage, another ring with family. And then he had me call to start integrating these things into my career. So now the technology piece, he's like, okay, I will use that. And he started having me insert kingdom principles into the company I work, which flourished, right? And we've been growing 2x, growing businesses continually, and abnormality, because we're just using the kingdom principles to lead, to serve, to help others, to be full of integrity inside of the workforce, all that kind of stuff. So it was a call to, I'll make use of this skill, and now let me show you why it was to be purposed, so that I may be a light in this industry. So that was the first, I would say, career call. The second was, a little bit later on, right before COVID, called into music, and it was, hey, let me show you about these talents you abandoned way back here when you were in high school. Yeah. Now let me pull those back into the time, and I spent about 4 years honing a craft, and really the Lord taught me how to write and do music. And probably 500 songs came out of that. It was probably the second best career. Ross met me at the best part, which was right when I became a Christian, and then the second best part was this cocooning around worship. And just being in the presence of God and understanding it, and understanding the skills that he put in me, and still not knowing the purpose. I still play it, paid for the poor, and I prayed for the captive, and I've worshiped with them. And I think that's where he's got me, right? And that's what I was called to. And so I'm now executing on that. And that's kind of moved its way into a regular pattern in my life. And then now, it took 10 years before actually the mission, or I would say the primary directive of my life that ties all of those things together and in forward, is really C.A.R. And the C.A.R.s the beginning. So C.A.R.s is just a piece of the thing, but it's the beginning of the thing that the Lord has actually called me to do, the burning bush moment, right? And he took me about 10 years of character development before he even released me to that. And I kept being like, hey, when I get, put me in coach, but I just didn't have enough work done inside to be able to hold what he was wanting to do in the earth. And so now that we're at that moment, it's just the calling kept enriching. They think of a tree's growth outward until it eventually comes to full flourishing and fruit, right? And we're almost at that, we're in first fruit season, and we're going to see the tree that the Lord, or an idea that the Lord has put in your heart and start pressing in you to move and guiding you in that direction. You feel it first internally, and then you hear his voice to clarify, right? And that allowed things to establish, for it to take form, for it to take structure, for it to take care. And then all of that then begins to flourish into fruit. And so now we're kind of at that season, and there may be another calling the Lord places on your heart later on, but it seems like it's never waste. Everything is compounding in the direction of the kingdom. And that's kind of been my experience.
That's fantastic, Josh. I love two things I'll just kind of reflect on. I love one, that you did begin with self. I think that's really important. I think a lot of people, when they think of calling, they think only something external, we do get to that part, but that's really kind of the last part ultimately, our relationship to the broader society is an important piece, but it's not the most important piece.
Yeah.
And so I like how you said, I got to be put back together myself, then this. And I love how you drew that out, because I think really ultimately, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about it at the end, but how calling with God, if it's God's involved in it, it's always an integrated call ultimately. Everything is integrated together. It doesn't mean all the same things, but from the self to the family to the marriage to the work, somehow it's all connected because God's one God. He's a unity. So I think that's really a really great way of putting it, is that, hey, now we're to this kind of ultimate place here, but it's all connected to everything else that happened before. Kind of have a little bit of similar story myself. Abby, what about you? What has God called you to particularly, and when did you discover that, and what is it?
Yeah, for me, it's been a gradual learning and discovery of gifts that God has placed inside of me that maybe I didn't know. And just looking back in hindsight, be like, oh, that's kind of always been there.
Mm-hmm.
For almost all of our marriage, it's been me staying at home, being with the kids, spending the past few years homeschooling, and never did I imagine that is what my life would be like, because I did not grow up in a home where I had a stay-at-home mom. Both my parents worked, so even that is interesting for me. But if I'm just looking career-wise, like, I went into undergrad initially as pre-med, and excuse me, switched to psychology, graduated with a bachelor's in psychology, but at the end of it, I was tired of school, so I never went further with that, right? So that's where I jumped into I need a job. And then, so whenever I got the call to go back to school a few years ago, it was a distinct hearing of the Lord. Like, I remember the moment of being in the shower and feeling that internal voice saying, you need to go back to school. I want you to be a Christian counselor. Yeah. And it was not on my radar, because I didn't want to go back to school, when I was 21, and it was not on my radar at all. I mean, it's like, okay, well, I'm a stay-at-home mom. That's what I imagined I would be, probably, forever. And I was fine with it. But hearing that distinct call, and then going back to school, getting my master's, and then having that discovery of, okay, God has put something inside of me that is a very caring aspect, right? Like, I do care for people. When I am in a group of people and with individuals, I'm very observant, right? I focus in more so on them than I do myself. And even looking back, like I said, like, I remember having a conversation with my dad a few years ago where, my dad is a man of very little sentimental words when I was growing up. Yeah. Man of many words. Yeah. But when it came to sentimental words, not really. And so I asked him, like, when I went into school as pre-med, like, it wasn't because of guidance from you guys. I don't even know why I did it. I just thought probably, oh, cool, I'll be a doctor, and that sounds good. And so I asked him, I was like, I didn't get that direction from you guys, and you guys didn't do any pushback. Like, what were your thoughts? And he just said, well, I knew you were a very caring person.
Yeah.
He never told me that then. He's gotten a lot more sentimental over the past 5-10 years than he was when I was growing up. And so I was like, oh, well, he saw that in me. And I didn't necessarily see that in myself. So looking back, it's like, okay, no, I have had that in me. God did put that in me. And I've just been seeing it over the years, whether it's with my kids, whether it's with the staff here, right? Whether that is for counseling, whatever capacity, God has put that in me. And I think I just needed that more clear like vocalization from the Lord so that I could see it myself. And then feeling that that calling to teach at the refuge and really feeling in my element and really feeling God's hand on that. It's like, oh, well, that's a teaching aspect too that he's put in me. So seeing it in different capacities and just kind of feeling like the last to know.
That's great.
Sometimes,
That's great.
And I feel like that's just kind of like how it has worked out in my life.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I love, one, thanks for sharing all of that, because that's really wonderful to hear kind of how the pieces come together. And the part about parents being kind of silent, it's kind of how my parents were too, but how those things kind of came to fruition over time. But it's kind of more the big themes of life, come together. But like you said, there needs to be a divine kind of affirmation. There needs to be, like, for it to actually be a calling. Otherwise, it's just kind of you doing what you feel, convicted about. Or just, that's what I feel like I should do because my parents told me to do that, right? So I think there's a sense of figuring that out along the way, but also there's a confirmation of it too. My story, I'll be brief about it, but my story was I wanted to be a musician growing up, and particularly a classical musician. And so I started taking private lessons. My family didn't have any money, so my grandmother paid for all of us to have lessons, private lessons, like pretty expensive too. She even paid me to practice, which I was like, Grandma, you're a sucker. I'm making so much money from you, Grandma. Like, I'm raking it in. I was practicing like 3 hours a day. She's paying me for this, and I was getting my lessons paid for. But the great news is that she was so much wiser than me, because that turned into a full scholarship in college for music. So she's like, joke's on you, So really, like, part of it was my passion, for sure, wanting to do that. Then it was, of course, my grandmother seeing that in me and encouraging me, and then providing the tools for me. So I really thought for a long time that's what I was going to be. Got a full ride scholarship to Oklahoma State. So that's really what I thought. Like, those were the things that confirmed to me, like, this is what I was going to do. And then I remember I was always in church, and I remember thinking, I love music. I love music ministry. But I never really connected those things together. I really thought that, okay, I'll help God out, maybe on the side, I'll help in music, and how kids think, I'll jump in and help the church when they need. And I kind of thought my calling was something that was up to me, really, in the end. And so I thought as I went to college that I would just be a bivocational person. I would do music all the time and help at the church sometimes, like, in music ministry. And that's kind of how I was planning my life. And that's when I went to college. That's how I was planning my life. And it's interesting what happens to your life when you begin to ask God what He wants to do with it. And it's not that He didn't put all those gifts in me to use them. I will tell you this, being a preacher is a lot easier when you've performed a lot in front of people. And I mean that in a positive way, not performing in kind of say negative sense. But like, I've been in front of people a whole lot of my life and had to do many, many challenging things in front of people. So in some ways that prepared me for what I do now. But when I started to ask God, it was a very different scenario, and very, very quick about it. But my calling was when I was asleep. I was asleep, and I was called in the middle of a dream, and God spoke my name, and I, of course, couldn't see Him. He was visible God, but I audibly heard Him call my name. And I woke up knowing that He'd called me to something much differently than I was doing. And I was like, what am I going to do now? I can't lose my scholarship. I can't do this. And it's like, we'll figure it out, kind of thing. And it was very strange. I was kind of like, you're calling me to do what now? And it was to ministry, but it wasn't a particular thing. But it was something like, I want to use this to get you there. So that music scholarship and all those abilities that God gave me basically funded me the whole way through. and got me through. And it was not to music ministry; it was more to general ministry, to preaching ministry and teaching the word. And there's other dreams that were involved in that, to be honest. So, but again, I think it's more the sense of you got to hear from the Lord ultimately to really understand a calling. I think that's ultimately the goal of the design for your life. Otherwise, I think you can still put together a really good career, but I don't know if you fully understand your design. If God made you, it's got to connect to Him. Ultimately, you can't just connect to kind of your giftings. It's got to connect to Him, kind of person. So I just thought maybe we do one more question here, and then we'll get into kind of the ultimate call together. But basically, if someone's unsure of their calling, maybe what would you tell them to do? Because I think a lot of people are working, like we've talked about, they're doing a lot of things, but not really connected to a calling per se. So what couple things would you encourage them in your own experiences to say, hey, this is more what a calling from God kind of looks like, or how you connect to that? What would you encourage them to do? Because many people are working but not feeling called. Yeah.
I think there probably needs to be some introspection of, are you wanting that calling?
Yeah.
Are you wanting to hear from God? And are you open to do what He says if you were to hear from Him?
Yeah.
Because if you're not, and the answer to that second question is no, then why bother ask the first question?
Yeah, I think that's the main problem probably for most people. Yes, what you just identified. Because it's one, do you even want Him to say?
Right.
And everyone gets scared.
Because once He says it,
that's right.
It is unremovable.
Yeah.
Right.
It's better that you don't know.
Yeah.
Because you're not always going to get the answer. You're not always going to get the answer you want. It will be challenging. It'll be the epic journey of your life, but it will sometimes be very hard.
It's sometimes pretty almost all the time.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I mean, if you think about the callings of the Bible and these people, none of them were like, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, none of them were, keep after it.
Exactly. I think it's also that the questioning of what's your motivation.
Yeah.
Like, are you asking for a calling from the Lord because you've got like that holy dissatisfaction, right? This righteous dissatisfaction with what you're doing, and you know that God has something more for you on a bigger level, not just personal satisfaction. I'm just unhappy with my job. Or are you asking for a calling because you just want a different job? You are fine with having a job and you don't want anything deeper than that, but maybe you just want some career advice.
Yeah.
Well, then look, you can go to LinkedIn.
Find a mentor. LinkedIn. Find a mentor.
Find a mentor. Go to LinkedIn.
Yeah. Find someone who's doing something
career counseling
you want, and ask them if that's true.
Right.
Like job shadowing. There's some different things.
Yeah.
We're not really talking separating career as utilitarian and calling as from God. I think there's let me put it in two categories or two-step process. I think it's really important that you can hear from God. And I think that is a seeking of a period of time. For Abby and I, we took a whole year and focused on only that because we need the value for our lives. We felt the calling first to study and test and spend time with people who can and vet and why? Why? Because if the enemy also likes to whisper in your ear. And a lot of people say, oh, I've got a calling from God, but you definitely got that from Satan, and it is oftentimes to confuse, distract, move you off on course to get you completely off the road, right? So if you do not know how to discern the voice of the Lord from the voice of Satan or his minions, you are going to be very confused in this whole journey and process. And I think people don't take this first step to get the second step. Yeah. So we spent a year, because I think it takes at least that, to be able to really hunger for just that. Just simplify it down, make that your New Year's resolution. Yeah. This whole year, I'm going to learn about hearing from God. First, I would say people that you truly hear from God, seek their advice, understand, get their advice, get around them. Also to vet, hey, I heard this from God. And they'll be like, no, that is not from God. Jesus, get behind me, Satan. Yeah. that you are not thinking of the kingdom, right? There are and I would say get in your word.
Yeah.
The word will help shape your mind to the proper patterns of thought that the Lord has so that you can recognize his voice, because he will be consistent with that. It will never contradict that. It will never compete with that in any way. You haven't come up with a new revelation that gets rid of the Old Testament, sorry. Or you have not come up with something that changes how the end times are going to occur. Jesus has spoken on these things and they're done. And it will be done, so like the word helps you navigate. And I think there are physically great places, like True North is a ministry here that was based off of John Eldridge's ministry. If you're, throughout the United States, if you're Band of Brothers, all these other organizations, Ransom Heart for Men, that have done a great job. And their whole purpose is creating a space for men to hear from God. Mm-hmm. So if you want to go to a place, there's often will be kind of what I talked about, stage one, self-improvement, so that we can get all of the wants or all the things that are in the way of hearing from God, your selfish tendencies to not receive the word, or things that you have decided about your life that are completely contrary to the kingdom of God and the will of God. Mm-hmm. However, as you work through that, he speaks to you. And that's really where I learned to hear from God, was by surrounding myself with great men that have already walked this road, already done the self-improvement work. And I think if you're here in Oklahoma, that is a great group of men to learn in. But I think there's also, Captivating and other types of retreats, Sacred Journey here in Oklahoma, that have dedicated from a women's perspective to get around people that are a little further down the road and can guide you into hearing from God. So, okay, step one. Hear from God. Intimacy, spending time with God, knowing it is his voice who is saying, because we're talking about, you're asking the big question about the purpose of your life, which, everybody's trying to answer and they're finding all the wrong answers, right? Okay, then you step in, and I think the second part is actually much easier than you think. Go through Abby's self-assessment, because it's a weighted thing, but then just ask him. Mm-hmm. He years ago when he told me, essentially, son, you do not know me. You don't know me. You've read of me, but you do not know me. And it broke my heart when I heard it. And then I asked him, well, what do I do? He said, just sit down and ask me questions. And I found that he has been an ever-ending, never holding back swell of the infinite wisdom. And I can ask any of those questions, because it's not just the question of, okay, what do I do? Now it's like, what do you do when you're in it? Like, wisdom is the most valuable thing that Abby and I have found as we've begun the quest. Mm-hmm. But if you don't take this first step, you'll never get there, and you'll be confused the whole journey all along the way, and the enemy will constantly move you off course. But once you get it, it's just ask him. Yeah. Just ask him, because he delights in talking to his design, just like a person who designed a McLaren or a Corvette, or if you talk to the designers and you hear the passion in their voice, the same is true of our great creator, and actually more so because he actually loves you, right? And it's not just an inanimate object. It's to a greater extent that he loves you more than you love your children. And I know you really love your children. I'm telling you, so much more so, he delights in aligning his children to purpose, because he knows what it does in our hearts. It delights him in his creation. Mm-hmm. It's just a whole smattering of things that is a great and I think one of the great experiences of your life is knowing what you are meant to do and be anchored in your purpose. And it also helps your life be so stable in your direction without questioning. But there's kind of like some steps in the middle that are super important that everybody is skipping. That's right. And there's like, asking in there. So there's people who are going into New Age that are trying to ask for these things, and you're asking definitely the wrong people. You're going to mediums in the Old Testament, and you're like, that is definitely you're hearing from the wrong team, right? Like, everything is, like, I know you want answers, but it is actually very available, and he doesn't hold back anything. Just knowing him now, he does not hold back anything. I'm actually quite shocked about the things that he will share about the kingdom, about his creation, about unknown technologies, and all the kind of stuff. Like, he'll tell you all kinds of things. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. But he is so good to also walk us through so his children aren't confused. Yeah. Like, we got to go to grade school. Go to grade school, and then we'll graduate, and then he'll put you into work.
Yeah. Well, I love, again, we just simplify it to this reality. There's some qualifications for it, like you said. But first, what are you seeking? It's like when the prophet comes, or when, Jesus says, whom do you seek, right? There's always this question like, what are you after here? I think if most people were confronted with that question, the answer would not be very pretty, right? And I think that's a lot of the problem, right? A lot of the problem is that people are seeking the wrong things instead of the right thing, right? But God's at the same time, like he said, he's very open and available. Here's the interesting part about it, and it blew my mind one time to think about it like this way, but one of the great church fathers, St. Augustine, said, we know God's mind better than we know our neighbors because we have the Bible. You think about that for a second. Like, we know more what God's about, what he's thinking, and what he's wishing than we even know of each other, because he wrote it all out. I mean, it's just incredible to think about that. And it's true. So it's not like God's like got a closed door policy. The door is wide open. You can go in there and chat with him at any moment. And I think that's the problems, that people are seeking the wrong things and going to the wrong places and getting the wrong information. And if they'll go to the right place, say, oh, this is what you're about, interesting. Now I want to seek you, like you said. You got to seek you, and then I want to ask you. So to me, it's, I think, those 3 steps, like you're saying. What's my heart about? Do I really want to hear from God? If so, he's made all this clear in his word. Will I go seek him out, and then will I sit down and start asking the questions? And I think that's the challenge for most people. They don't want to do those things, and if they do, it's like, I didn't want that answer. I knew you'd say this, right? Right? It's like that famous section in the prophets. I think it's in Kings. That's typically where all the bad kings are listed. And Ahaz says, "Bring me all the prophets." So what he means is, bring me all the yes men. He says, bring them all in, and they all say what he wants to hear. And then he knows none of that's good wisdom. He knows it's terrible advice, and he knows that they're just telling him what he want to hear. And then he literally begrudgingly says in the text, "Bring me one of those prophets of God." And then he comes in and he goes, "Your kingdom's going to fall." And it was just like, I think that's what the reality is. Like, most people recognize, if they don't hear from God because they don't want to, there's this kind of negative part to it. Yeah. You can't do life your own way anymore. Yeah. And then once you submit to that, then suddenly things start to change. Yeah. So that's kind of what I think we're saying, is that why it's so difficult for people, because they're not going to get the answer they want to hear until they come into agreement with God. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, wow, this is what you made me for. So what kind of...
I'll add to that is, you're not going to get the answer you want to hear, but it is a better answer.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay, so what he's asking you to exchange is like, you have this, you have a bowl of porridge, and you're like, I love porridge, and this is my favorite. I'm not giving that up. And he says, you need to get rid of the porridge. Right. Why? Because I need to clear your plate, because I'm bringing you steak. Yeah. Like, okay, well, if you knew the steak was on the other side, would you not begrudgingly give up the porridge? He's asking you to give up something worthless most of the time for something, everlasting. Mm-hmm. That's like again, we go to our Greatest Exchange podcasts and kind of go through that, because that's actually what he's asking you to do. So, don't be so fearful of the answer. It won't be all the time what you want to hear. I mean, Moses was like, sure, you don't want me to talk. He has all kinds of excuses. But the reality is that, if we, knowing Moses, and some of us are like, what if God put me into that scenario? You would be, for the epicness of your life, right? On the other side, in the honor there will be on Moses for all eternity. A lot of people would exchange that for it. It'd be, it was not easy. Yeah. It was very hard. However, I think that it was greater. It was better than where he was just being, a sheep farmer and kind of staying off the radar for a long time, and that could have been his reality, but he exchanged that for something greater, and he gave him a people and a nation. And so I think if, it's not always your right answer, but it is better.
Yes. And I think, like you all are kind of saying, that we're connecting here, really calling for the sense of kind of vocation to relationship. And that's kind of what we're also saying. And I think that's why the Bible puts so much stress on what we call salvation. It puts so much stress on this. But it's not as much the salvation that this kind of like, transactional thing that happens, this kind of spiritual, commercial thing that happens. It's more of like this, in a nice way of saying, like this benevolent invasion of your life. Yeah. And God comes in and he says, I've got a better plan for you, but we're going to have to work some of these things out. And that's kind of what we mean by salvation. But it all begins, Christian salvation, with a calling, is what the Bible teaches. So I'm going to finish by reading this from 2 Thessalonians 2. It says, But we ought always to give thanks to God for you, brothers beloved by the Lord, because God chose you as the first fruits to be saved. That means in connection with Jesus' resurrection, through sanctification, that's the hard stuff, by the Spirit, and belief in the truth. To this he called you through our gospel, that's how he brings us to himself, so that you may obtain the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. So as believers, what he's saying there is the calling ultimately is to relationship with God, so that when we know the designer, we know how we're designed. I think that's what the Bible is trying to teach us here. So I'll finish with maybe a story and get your final thoughts on this. But I was talking to an older man, this could have been 10 years ago or so. Had a good relationship with him, and we were chatting over lunch, and I just remember, so what now? He just retired, and he was sharing some things about what he was going to do. And he'd been going on some mission trips in the last few years of his life, and he'd been working in a different sector for most of his career. And then I said, so what gets you going on these mission trips? That these are like to all over the place. I mean, India, Colombia, Cuba, all over the place. And he goes, I think I finally figured out what I was made for, is what he said. But then he said, with kind of a sad, like regretful tone, he said, I think I've wasted my whole life. He said to me. And I was like, and I think there's this sense of like, he's thankful that he didn't waste any more time. You know what I mean? I think there was that kind of shift there. And I think that's kind of what salvation can do for you, is that ultimately, if you tap into who God is and know who he is, suddenly you see what your real purpose is, and you don't have to live with regrets anymore. You don't have to live with this kind of utilitarian thought. Like, there's actually a way that God does want to connect to the heart. He doesn't want to just connect to the hands and to the feet. Like, he really wants to connect to us. So salvation, I think, for us includes a calling to God, and it also includes a purpose for why he made us, a design as well. So I thought we'd just finish by saying, why do we need this call to be the main call of our lives and then direct the rest? Kind of like Josh was saying about kind of connected back to self and then move. Why is that the most important piece of all these callings we have, of calling to our job or work, calling to our home, calling to marriage, calling to children? Why is that call most important as we kind of try to figure this thing out? What do you all think?
Well, that call to a relationship with Christ is the foundation of everything else that you may feel is a calling or is your calling. Is that foundation has to be there, because what else would you be guided by?
That's right.
Right? Like everybody says these days, follow your heart. Well, your heart is deceitful above all else. Right. So do I want to follow my heart, which is selfish and it's self-serving?
Yes. Yes.
No, but if my foundation is Christ, then that's what I'm going to follow. Even in the ups and downs of that path, right? So, without that foundation and without that, you always coming back to that, then you're just going to end up wandering aimlessly, and in the end, I think probably have a lot more regret.
Yeah, I love how you put that it's the foundation, but then it also is informing every other calling. Right, and I think that's kind of the essence of it, is that these others won't make sense if you don't have this one in place to kind of speak to all those others. That's great. I mean, Josh, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think the greatest call is a call to love.
Yeah.
If you say, what is the greatest command? I mean, he's commanding you. It is a call. It is love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. It's to remove all self from the equation. Right, the self I call the inward arrow, and the love I call the outward arrow. Yeah. It's how much are you thinking about others, thinking about the Lord, and I think the call to relationship is the center of the universe. I think the greatest thing is family, and it is you look at that even in the Trinity at the smallest format, probably the greatest format, but the central format, and then out of that he called a family. Yeah. And we started with the Elohim, and then he moved to us. And so you've got this family structure that the Lord has set up. And so the greatest call, if you're in heaven, the primary thing people think about is spending time with the Lord. Yeah. And if that's the center of where everything is headed, it needs to be the center of my now. And if that is the central design of how things are to be, so things will not be in alignment with design if they're not that way. Okay. And so if you would like your life to be in alignment, then just seek relationship with Jesus. Make Jesus your best friend in real life.
That's right.
And make his word something that you long for every day. Make real conversations a pattern that you have with him, and not talking at him. Real conversations with Jesus that you can have. I do not believe that people can truly love without knowing Jesus, and if it not coming from him first. Yeah. And you look at C.A.R., the purpose of C.A.R. is not to make money. Although we need to make money, it's functionally there. It's a tool we use. It is to love. Yeah. And if it's not its purpose, it's not kingdom. And so, again, so in order for it to thrive, it has to come from the Lord. It has to, it has to be Cross Automotive, not Joshua Automotive, and it needs to be able to go in the direction of love. And if it isn't going in the direction of love, then it is sin to our company. It is a missing of the mark. It is a pushing off of the track. Mm-hmm. And so we sometimes as leaders have to come back and realign it to love so that we can be realigned to the kingdom. It's kind of like a GPS. You need constant redirection, constant reminder of the path, constant reorientation to the next turn, which requires relationship. And it requires a checking in. It requires his input because he's really steering the boat.
Yep. It's fantastic, y'all. I love, again, that the idea of reorientation and reintegration, and again, using the arrow, you might not know it, but that's exactly how Martin Luther described the whole problem, is that he says the heart turned inward is the great problem of life. The heart turned on itself, actually, is what he's saying. So God comes in and says, hey, let's do an about face there, and really that's the point, is that if you don't get the arrow correct, you can't really understand the rest of it very well. Everything else becomes this kind of dysfunctional and kind of disintegrated reality. And really, when we come to the Savior, it's kind of like yesterday. I'll finish with this little story. My wife was cooking something for dinner and pulled a kitchen door open. Those hinge just fell right off the ground. Stuff went everywhere, and I put on my hero cape, and went in and I fixed it. And I saw a little hinge, I put it back together, whatever, and it torn off the side, and there was something that was loose on it or whatever. And I saw the imprint of who made it, And I think about that for just a moment. I thought about that. And I was like, that's kind of how we are, is the reality of it, is that a lot of people walking around don't know that God put his signature on them when he made them. And they're just broken people. They don't know how they use, they don't know where they fit. They're just kind of laying there on the side, and they're just wondering, why does this not work? Well, you got to figure out who made you first. You got to figure out who saved you so that you can get back to being used in the way that God's designed you. And that's really what calling is about. You've got to be called back into that integration with God, and then, like I said, reorient your whole life, because it's not a one and done, like you said. It's just this ongoing walk with God. And again, to figure out, it's kind of fun to discover more of what God made you for. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, that's really more what we're talking about. Calling is that God is summoning us back to himself, and then summoning us ahead to walk with him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the most exciting, but also most challenging part of being a Christian, I think, in that way. Well, y'all, thanks for a really wonderful discussion this morning, making it happen, even as my car broke down this morning. And I really appreciate y'all making this work out. And I just want to finish, as always, by just promoting our website to anyone who's listening. Go to crossautomotiveroyale.com, and you'll see on there quite a few options of things, whether it's business inquiries or ministry partnerships, or just getting to know about what our company is about. We want to direct you to that site. Please send in any questions you might have or inquiries. We'd love to answer and connect with you in that way. We want to thank Joshua and Abigail again for this morning, and it was a really wonderful discussion. Until next time, signing off.